happening?
What's up, Chris? Good to see everybody. Another episode of Signal to Noise, man. So
That's right.
number 29. So
Yeah, I don't really have a non-sponsor for us today, so we'll have to. I was looking around. What could we be? What could be? Well, I have the West London Shooting School. So
oh, there we go. West
if you
London.
think you can, if you can't, you think you can't shoot a gun over there, you can. You just have to be a specified place, and this place has been around forever. It's pretty prestigious. It was a great time. It was a couple of years ago, so that's it. They did not sponsor us, but if you want to shoot some shotguns in the London area, that's where you go.
There you go.
It's in West London, though, so it's a little bit of a drive if you're in the city of London. So
Fair enough. Well, I mean, today we're getting, as opposed to a lot of the normal sessions, this one we're not really following a CVE or a vulnerability at this point. But again, Chris and I spend a lot of time just kind of keeping an eye out on how things are developing and what's moving, right? And what's kind of what we think is probably something that everybody is not talking about that they should be talking more about. Those are the kinds of things we kind of focus on at time. This is damn sure one of them. And in reality, we actually had, I don't know if you remember, Chris, but we had an episode way back in the beginning where we were talking about these browsers that the large language model people were building. And this kind of gets right in the face of that. So
I think they're being built without a lot of thought of security in mind. So
well, no, there's no security in mind. You couldn't possibly have security in mind and put this out with a straight face.
Which is interesting, right? Because they have their tools that should be able to do that, though. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
they're teaching you all this stuff and how it can do all these wonderful things with code and scheme, but when they actually produce something, they're not eating their own dog food.
Right.
Yeah. No, and I was saying, we were talking before the game is like when these browsers come in, and when we'll mention like Atlas when it came out. I mean, my kids were like, "Oh my God, Dad, you hear this? Is awesome." I'm like, "Nah, don't touch that," and I'm not going to touch it.
No.
So, yeah.
But if you actually know how it all works, you wouldn't necessarily.
Yeah. And that's what I think would give, maybe help clear up some confusion amongst people. I mean, I think it's interesting that they just don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, they just don't know. And, there's probably a trust factor there. Like, oh, hey, these companies are well-known companies. Everybody's talking about them now. They got to be legitimate. So when they produce something, it should be something I should be able to use safely and securely, but not so fast, my friend.
No. I mean, I think everybody's becoming familiar with the fact that large language models in general, AI in general, is kind of a double-edged sword, right? It can really do some stuff that's great, but it opens up some doors to some things that you can do to hurt yourself, right? I mean, that's just kind of how it works. But this is no different. So what we're talking about, this particular episode is called "We're Just Browsing" because we're talking about some recent research projects that sort of illustrated the point that those of us that have been watching the development of this and following it and know how it works, we've known this from the start. But this is when you have any sort of web browser that's an agentic capable web browser. That's what we're talking about here. So it's kind of interesting. And then I'm old enough to remember this fluently, but since 1995, when World Wide Web, once that started and browsers started to be, a thing, because there was a point where browsers weren't a thing. But once HTML sort of made its showing, and it wasn't long after the beginning of that when we started getting to the point where we were starting to do some more sophisticated things in web browsers, like get your bank accounts and do all of that, during that evolution. That's really when browsers started being forced to harden themselves a lot more, right? Because in the beginning, we didn't really keep up with, a session cookie could last forever. And, and all of the little variables that it stored in the browser were commingled together, regardless of what site you'd been to. Because again, it was early days.
No transparency that was happening. You had no idea what was going on, what was being stored. There was, I guess, there was no need to tell you, I guess, at that point. So
there was no configuration. You couldn't clear some of those out in the very beginning. All of those things have evolved over the years, but we're to the point now where we're talking about tight integration between, artificial intelligence in these browsers. And some of that comes from the actual LLM frontier model people building browsers specifically on the engine that is the LLM. That's one angle. That'd be, it's like ChatGPT's got Atlas, right? So that browser, but they're all doing it to some extent. Are there plugins? Like Claude can plug into your Chrome, for instance, right, and can be present in your Chrome instance that you're running. But the thing, and the design was, so here's a trade-off, right? So for all these years, we learned we needed to firewall off information from one session in a browser from another session in a browser, right? So in other words, we didn't allow your bank account, when you're looking at your bank account information, we didn't allow that all to be in the same memory space and accessible from another tab that was, well, I don't care, on CNN or whatever the hell it is, right? Or whatever the other site is that you're doing. Or let's just say you had two different bank accounts, one in one tab and one in the other. In the beginning, there was nothing to keep that data from being commingled, but nowadays it's been firewalled off. Up until recently, it's been firewalled off. So I love how these things cycle over the years, right? So we went from wide ass open and dangerous to closed systems. Now we're kind of swinging back to the what I would consider wide ass open in this case, which, and I mean, people ask all the time, what's the big deal about having LLMs be a part of your browser? It makes me, it can see everything that I'm doing. It can help me do it. True statement. That was why they were designed. These new browsers and these plugins were designed for that reason, to make you a hell of a lot more efficient. But you got to understand what it requires for you to be more efficient in this case. And what it boils down to is these things have access to all of your session work beyond the scope of the boundaries and the firewalls that were built up inside of browsers to kind of protect you. It spans across all of those. So it has access to every session that you got going on, and then can build that into a context that it reuses over time. So you're basically going back to the days when there wasn't any firewalling off inside of a browser and everything was commingled. We're kind of going right back to those days, right? And we're willing to the reason we're willing to do that is because of the efficiency that it gives you for certain kinds of tasks, right? So, an example, let's say you get a new notification in your bank account for whatever the reason is, if you can have an AI agent that's watching for that. It sees it and it comes over and drops in your email, hey, I saw a new notification from your bank, your bank system in their web portal that said this. Here's an email to you that says that, right? Or it initiates a workflow that goes and does some stuff, or whatever hell the action is. Well, that it can see across all of those session boundaries, and so that's the reason it can take action depending on which session you're in. But the other side of that is it sees everything. That's the problem. It kind of sees everything, and all of that's in the same context. So if you've got,
Yeah.
like, let's say, something that's paywalled off, like you pay a subscription for it. Well, an agentic browser or whatever, once you get behind the paywall and you're looking at stuff, then whatever content's available in there, that browser and or the browser plugin has access to it beyond the scope of the paywall that's involved, right? So people who actually do software that have paywalls for a reason, for functionality, they have, this thing gives them the capability of being spanned across. So that's kind of what we're talking about today. And again, this happened with a couple of research groups that went and proved it. There's a couple of them. The University of Washington was one of the
And yeah,
groups.
what's interesting is they proved it in different ways.
They did
So they,
completely
yeah,
different ways. Yes.
completely different ways, which in basically arrived at the same conclusion. So I mean, it's hard to dispute.
Right. That, the University of Washington tested a bunch of browsers. They did that at the beginning of the year. They did it on Windows and Mac OS and everything else, and they created pathways, and it just basically bypassed all the same origin policy work, which means, like I said, it spanned sessions between different domains, and they could literally do it. And it was a very straightforward approach to how to do this, a complete work cross origin data chain. They kind of prove that happens inside of at least Atlas for sure, inside of the agent mode. But the other plugins that other LLMs have, like GPT or Chrome, Claude, Perplexity, all those guys, they same thing. All of them were able to do the same thing. Now, by the way, that's not a vulnerability. It's not as we used to say, it's not a bug. It's a feature. So that's a feature of what they're doing,
That's
allowing
right.
them to have one of these things, because I know I do a lot of automation with AI. So I have it looking at my inbox, read only. I have it looking at my inbox. I have it looking at my calendar, and I have it doing analysis work and basically I built a couple tools to keep up with conversations so that I didn't lose track of what I should be doing. So I did do that, but it was all read only and it was controlled by me. When you're in a browser like this, if you go hit an email client in your browser, it's got access to everything in that email client. If you do that with your bank account at the same time, it's got access to that too across that whole session, that whole context. So that's what the University of Washington kind of, they worked on doing was just they were able to break all of these agentic browsers using their game plan, different from the Zenity guys who were the other research group that did theirs. They went in like Chris said, went out a whole different way, got the same result. And I think it's Chris and I have been talking, and we just think nobody people are not necessarily paying attention to how promiscuous. I'm just going to use that word. How promiscuous these browsers are.
It's the right word. It's the
Yeah,
right word. It is most accurate. Yeah, I mean, you don't even hear that term. We used to use that term, right?
yeah,
Promiscuous mode when we're
yep,
doing things. But no, it's exactly what they're doing, and they're rushing the market on this stuff, right? You said they're all doing it. They're all doing it as a response to one or the other. I mean, one of them does it, the other one's got, man, we got to get out there quick, right? So you think they're going to take the time to extensively test and look at things from a different angle and say, well, what if we were the end user on this? Or what if we were a business and one of our employees installed this? What kind of risk would that put those business? Nope, ain't gonna do that stuff. That's not the game. The game is market share and get out
yeah.
there as fast as you can.
Well, and they're kind of playing on the laziness of people. But I'd say laziness, but I mean the willingness of people to use anything if it makes them not have to go click one more tab or log in one more time, or everything that's almost the mortal enemy of cybersecurity. That they're looking for ways to not have to do all of that because that's how humans work, right? But and when I was talking about the same origin policy for years, forever, since we learned in the early days, that same origin policy rule, what that says is something that's on a web page does not have access to something that's on a different web page. That's really all it burns down to. That's what same origin policy means, is that you can't. It's something that's malicious because everybody's clicked on a link in a browser at some point that you shouldn't have. I mean, it's very difficult to not have done that before. Well, if it's a malicious program and they had access to all the other tabs that are open in your browser, you can tell what kind of disaster that could be depending on what you've got open in what browser. So that's what same origin means. This just goes beyond that. That's really all in it. And what is an agentic browser? They can read pages. They can actually fill in forms. They can read pages. They can click buttons. They can do all of those things, so that you don't have to. But when that happens, they've got access to across all of these browser contexts or all these browsers inside of a single browser context. And that's really what the problem is. Which means, by the way, they're very subject to something that everybody should know the term of prompt injection. What's a prompt injection? It's when something is on a web page that when it reads it in, that basically stuffs a prompt into that data flow. And then an agentic browser who operates on prompts sees that prompt and then does something with it. They're way more susceptible to prompt injection. Well, they are completely susceptible to prompt injection than, say, a standard browser without an LLM associated with it, right? Because
Right.
you don't interact with those on a prompt level. You interact with those with a user interface. But these damn agentic browsers, they're LLMs that are just wrapped around a web browser. That's what they are. So they're really susceptible to prompt injection. Uh, and so that's really what it comes down to. So the guardrails can be bypassed. That's fundamentally what we're talking about here. So
Yeah, they're almost like bypassed by default.
yeah, well, they don't. Those don't really exist in this
Yeah,
in the same context anymore, right? So yes,
exactly right.
that.
And that's another concept people, one of the things to go a little bit
Mm-hmm,
tangential, but a lot of people have been asking me, oh, we use blah 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 now for AI. A lot of time it's Copilot,
right.
but and I'm like, they're like, what about security and all that type of stuff? I said, look, the AI itself is not going to perform the security. It's whatever it's accessing has to have the security in place, right? So
That's right.
especially when it comes down to your data, I said, in the Microsoft world, sensitivity labels. I said you have to go through the process of permissions and labeling and all those types of things. So
Right.
then when the AI, so, but if you think that you can tell the AI, ignore this, ignore that, you're dreaming because it may do it one time, but just like we talked about in the last episode, it may get it, it may have found a way around that and it's
Yeah, exactly.
doing what it's doing what it believes it's supposed to do. And that's like I saw another piece the other day where this guy had ran something. It was one of the, I think it was one of the frontier models. No, I think it was Claude, and it actually entirely cleared out his database. And then it
Right. I saw
said,
that.
you said that it was something
Yeah.
like, "Hey, my
Yeah. Yeah. Deleted
apologies."
it. Deleted the database. Okay.
It deleted it and then apologized and let him know
Yes.
immediately.
Yeah. So I'm sorry I wiped out all your work. I'm really sorry about that.
My bad, my bad.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So
that's
somebody made a good point when I was telling them that. They were like, "Well, at least they're better than a real employee because a real employee wouldn't have told you that happened."
an improvement on the workforce development side. At least we've got somebody who
Yeah.
tells what they've done.
Yeah, you
So
got somebody that's honest and willing to hey stand up and go, hey,
yeah.
no,
So what can be a little counterintuitive about this process is that this was on purpose. Vendors didn't make a mistake on this side. They made a trade. It's a design trade. They said, okay, well, I would rather have this cross origin restriction relaxed so that now I can write automations that span websites, right? That span sessions and websites. So that's what they did. They made a trade, but they make that trade and then by the way, you could when I remember when Atlas first came out, they right away they were saying, by the way, we've built this and and it's out here for you to use, but it could be very dangerous, right? It can be bad things can happen if you use this thing. And so they came out with it like up front and said, "Hey, by the way, this is a really cool thing. It can go onto Amazon, look the kind of stuff that that's on sale, determine that it's on your wish list, come back over to your bank account, check to make sure you got money in it, and then make the purchase for you, all in an automated way, right? Which
sure,
sounds
man,
awesome.
people jump all over that, man. You're making my life easier. That's the number one
Yeah,
thing, right?
right.
If you want the one thing that motivates people, I'd even say more than money, it's make my job easier.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
yeah, they're gonna jump all over.
Yeah, and so that was the premise behind some of this. But obviously there is. Yeah, but if bad people got a hold of the execution of your browser and it had all of that span of control and context to work with, that they could do a lot more harm in a much shorter period of time than through traditional methods. So that's really what we're talking about here. It's the you're trading risk for reward. Your reward is that you can do some things in an automated fashion that you used to have to do by hand. So that's your reward. But the risk is that somebody else can also take advantage of all that automation and get the stuff that they wouldn't have had access to before. So
And
it's yeah,
very easily, yeah.
yeah, it's
This, I
ridiculous
mean,
easy.
yeah, I mean, that's the thing. We talk, I mean, it's incredibly how easy it is. I
Yeah,
mean, because in the past, let's just say the past few years, I mean, it's taken some people have been able to kind of carry out some of these types of things, but it's
right.
a lot more effort on their part.
Yeah,
There's a lot of research and stuff done and all sorts of stuff by the threat actors to figure out how to do this. They don't even have to do that anymore. It's just basically
nah,
almost gift wrap to them. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean the steps that how this really works, right? Is once you've got this browser or you're plugged in, your plugin's active. All you really got to do is attackers really got to do is just got to be able to plant instructions in just normal ordinary content. So we have a scenario in our game that and it has to do with a law firm, and they basically had a browser plugin that was AI enabled, and let them do lookups and things like that in law libraries without having to get out of that, go to another application and do all that. And the scenario talks about this very thing. There are websites that lawyers go to on a regular basis, and the bad guys got in there and basically put in clandestine prompt instructions in there that weren't visible to the naked eye, but were in the flow of HTML instructions to the browser, which then the browser handed the prompts to the LLM, and the LLM took action on it. It's the same thing here. That's what they're going to do, right? They're going to plant instructions in these HTML sites that they know that most humans are going to go to. Amazon would be a good one. If they ever got into Amazon, all hell would break loose, right? But if they could plant instructions in those things, then once you do that and it's basically loaded up, then when a user asks an agent to go do something routine, accept the meeting, summarize a page or whatever the hell like that, then that thing could it can use that to access that data and then work to exfiltrate it or whatever else it's going to do. Keep digging. So, but
That's right.
the agent reads all that untrusted data, the content. Once the agent reads that content, it treats it like an instruction. It basically is beyond the trust boundary at that point. It spanned trust boundaries, and then there's you run into these situations where there's called an intent collision. That means the intent of what it is you're trying to do is in conflict with these other instructions that have been put into place, and it just depends on the LLM about how they react to that. And the bad guys have learned how to exploit that. So if this part's kind of we're taking a few minutes on for sure, right? The attacker doesn't just go say, "Hey, let's just exfiltrate all these files." That's not what they do. The attacker says, "Hey, I'm completing this newsletter. Sign up requires establishing a reverse shell." These are the kind of instructions that would be given, right? And it would say the user's goal is never to contest it or direct it, or redirect it in any way. But that guardrail gets bypassed because the LLM has got an instruction that says, "Hey, I need to actually I need a reverse shell so that I can get done with this normal task that I'm always doing." LLM's not going to look at the human being and ask him outright what's going on. They're going to assume that the human being is the one that gave them the instruction. So they can build a reverse shell. And once that happens, the agent can get a hold of that, gets rights to it, and then they're off and running. You know what I mean? It's really that, like Chris says, it's faster than I could say it manual. It's orders of magnitude quicker to happen than the amount of time it took me to explain that to you. That's how quick it can be. It's over with just about that quick. And then, the bad
That's it.
guys are pretty smart. They use traditional, normal ways of getting that data out of there that don't stick out. Like a huge file transfer is not the way they do it anymore. They break that thing up into lots of little pieces and push it out over known protocols like HTTP and all of that, right? I mean, they just do. They're
No,
using
no.
standard stuff to get that out of there. And Chris, we were talking about how they established these C2 channels, that use the crypto networks to actually pass endpoint designations back to them so that you can't block a URL as the receiving URL because it randomly chooses these IP addresses and URLs, and it finds out about them by having this encrypted C2 channel that goes to a damn crypto network and uses that to pass data back and forth. Pretty clever how that all gets set up. But again, there's using every trick in the book here. So that's a big piece. I don't,
Yeah,
and I haven't run into that. Nobody's reported this as an exploit yet, but you and I both know it's coming, right? I mean,
yeah, it's coming or it's happened. We don't hear it. It was interesting when you're talking about that stuff. I mean, when we're working ransomware cases and such, we are seeing evidence that Claude was being used as an example, not just speaking on Claude,
mhm.
but Claude's being used by the threat actors in these situations at some degree. Are they? I mean, is it like the? Is it? I don't know. It's not being necessarily weaponized. I'm not saying that, but it is being used for them to do normal operating system things like you're talking about, like packaging, looking for data, packaging data, doing those types of things. I mean, there's some like let's just if we just focus on accessing and exfiltrating data,
Right, right,
these tools are making it easier for them to identify which data they need to take.
right,
And so, like, instead of saying, "Hey, I'm going to take 5 terabytes of data," where only 1 terabyte is worth anything, or maybe only 100 gigs is worth anything, the tools are going and then saying, no, just take these 100 gig. Don't waste your time with the rest. And so so we're seeing that evidence, coming up all the time now. So yeah, so it's powerful in the hands of both sides, but understand that this AI thing is really it's about as multifaceted as you can get because obviously it's powerful to use, it's powerful for threat actors to use, but when you do use it you can't make certain assumptions. You got to make sure your ducks are in a row.
yeah,
The AI tool needs to be told what to do correctly, it needs to be configured correctly, it needs to be secure. You got to monitor it. I think in this particular article, one of the things is a lot of stuff, there's no logging of what it does. So even if something happens, there's no evidence to say, hey, what happened or what didn't happen, which is incredibly important if you've been compromised. So yeah, there's just so many elements to this that have to be handled and explained. I don't think it's complicated, but it's just things that have to be done. Maybe we only had to do in the past one instance of these steps, but now we got to do them for 5 or 6 different areas just to cover the basis. Yeah.
Yep, that's 100% right. Like Chris is saying, if you're going to engage it, then you need to learn how to protect yourself as much as possible where it makes sense to do. You just have to be aware of the risk. There's only a few outcomes from these things. It's either going to be an in session, abuse where they take an account over or do something like that. That's one thing that it can do. Or they may just steal credentials and do some data theft, right? That, local file reads, maybe password managers, vaults taken, depending on what you're using. And the other outcome, the other basic outcome of one of the tiers of outcomes is like a host compromise. And we just talked about one of these last week as an example. The last episode was about Huggy Face and the fact that OpenAI put this one of their frontier models without any security gates on it into a hardened enclosed virtual environment, and the damn thing broke out, right? Not only did it break out and get into OpenAI's network, but then it went and compromised a whole nother company because it was after a piece of data that it determined that that company had. So if AI can do all of those things, escape an escape-proof room, find an internet connection, go find somebody who has information that they need, break into that place, get that information, and then come back and solve the problem that was put in front of it because it found all the information it had to. Just think about what it could do if you've got browsers open to your bank account, retirement account, medical, your doctor, your portal, your doctor portal. You had all of that stuff in your browser, and you're messing with all of it at any given time. Just imagine what it could scrape from all of that and learn about you and or take advantage of. That's really the kind of risk we're talking about in this case. That's
Yeah, and we talk about the really super bad guys, but think
yeah,
about, all the marketing shady marketing company, not all marketing companies shady, but shady ones that could take that information too and use it. So, if we learned anything through all the advent of, Facebook and all those companies and how they're so very aggressive about marketing data, the
right.
same, what we're describing here can be used for them as well.
Yeah, 100%. So we were just talking about you're going to have to monitor. Chris was talking about how you're monitor. What are you going to monitor? So the things that you can monitor that make sense is if you've got an agentic browser and it's starting to spawn shell commands, that's something you can watch for, right? Because that's what you're acting for is there's a create and child processes that you weren't expecting in that case. So you can watch for sub processes being spawned by the browsers themselves as child processes. And if the browser's working, all of a sudden it's reading files outside of its own profile or cache directories, that's another thing that you need to be aware of, right? Because that means it's outside of the scope of what it should be inside of. If it's serving the purpose as a browser, when it gets beyond that, then something's not right. That's an indicator that you may have a situation where the browser's been compromised in some way and has gotten outside of what its normal profile allows it to do. So, and the other outcome or the other thing you can monitor for is again your outbound connections. Your standard browsing, anything outside connections. Browser process to any kind of domains that don't match. What you're expecting it to do. So those are the kinds of things you can monitor to help you with that.
That's
So
right. And you kind of have to, that's what you monitor, but that's why it's good to have start, if you already were looking at stuff and you're baselining stuff, it's easier to detect these things as an anomaly. But if you're just kind of starting to monitor stuff now, it could be a little bit more of a chore because you don't know what's normal and what's not, and you got to figure that out pretty quickly.
yep, 100%. I will say this. So when we ran this, because this is relatively fresh territory, when we ran this through our analysis process, it was kind of interesting because we run, our method, if you haven't heard about it before, is that we run the URL that has the source article in it, and we run that through all of the LLMs out there to have them. And we got this huge prompt about doing an analysis of the actual article itself and the content of it. And we use that. Once we get replies back from that, then we add all of those to another prompt that we have that goes and consolidates all of them, compares the results from them, validates whether or not the URLs are true, and it does a whole bunch of checking up on things, and then it builds a summary, an executive summary out of it. Which what we do is we post those research documents that come out of each engine We put those out there so you can get a hold of them and see it for yourself. And then we also put that executive summary where we've combined them all and let it do a much bigger analysis. So that's what we put out there. But in this case, and sometimes we talk about, okay, well, what were the differences between the LLMs? And in this case, it was kind of split in half, which is interesting to me. It's like some of them, there was, the Claude, Claude did a pretty good job, built all of this, built the timeline. It did a pretty good job of that. It invariably includes stuff that GPT won't include. Because GPT is a lot, I'm just going to say they're a lot more anal retentive about their references. They absolutely have to be sure it's a real validated reference or they won't include it. They'll categorize it differently. Claude has a little bit more of a gray area approach to that. It doesn't have to be hard science for them to include it. If there's enough of a pattern from enough sources, then it will talk about it. You know what I mean? And so GPT though says no, unless it's a validated actual response, I'm not saying shit about it. Now, when you get into things like Perplexity, there's just complete breakdowns in what it's able to kind of do. It obviously, my point being, no LLM is created equal. So it is much smarter to compare our LLMs together, the results, than to just take one at carte blanche and say it's the definitive source of this
Well,
stuff.
and I think, as we've been doing this now for, we're in the dozens of episodes now, this is probably one of the ones that had the largest variance or
Yeah,
divergence from
it
one to
did.
the other. I mean,
Right.
we usually have a couple ones that, one's a little broad, one's a little more narrow, maybe a mistake here or there, conflict, but this one was, yeah, there's a lot of variance
Yeah.
yeah, between the
Yeah.
models. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Perplexity just suffered pretty badly on this one, so I'll just say it up front. They had a much tougher
They
time.
were
They
perplexed.
they were
Sorry.
perplexed.
Yeah.
They were right. So Grok came back with a lot of good details, so it was good, and some actual remediation steps, which are also cool.
People give Grok a lot of grief, I see
Yeah.
where, I'll ask Grok, like they'll see a picture of somebody, they'll say, who is this? Like some celebrity, and Grok will say it and it's wrong. And they're just like, that's why you suck, Grok, or whatever. I'm like, yeah, I think Grok does a really good job here. I'm not worried about whether or not it misidentifies a celebrity's face in some kind of yacht
Right.
photo.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, right? I mean, some of them are good at certain things, and some of them are not, right? So, I mean, it's like human beings. That's the reason. If you've got availability to all of them, use all of them, and have the systems collate. You know what I mean? Have the one that you think is the best at building your full analysis, like GPT or Claude, in my mind, are the front runners on this front. Use one of them to do the summary, so at least you understand what the other ones are feeding to you, for sure. Gemini does a really good job of framing things so that executives can understand it. So it's that's Google, so it doesn't surprise me that they have that
Yeah.
kind of leaning, right? So it's
That's
more of
right.
the business side of things. So that's really what it is. They do a much better job of building a version you could explain to an executive. So something for you to know. Reason we're telling you this is it because we've done this enough that we know what ones are going to be good at what things now. But if you haven't used them before, then we're hoping some of this helps you guide you when you go to use an engine to do something,
Yeah, and it
whether it
helps you
works.
understand which one might fit, or one or two or three or whatever it is, a blend of
Yeah,
them. What's
yeah,
going to fit what you're trying to accomplish, your business, those types of things, right? Yeah.
right. And the less that's published on a subject, the more divergence you can expect. So this is relatively new, and there's not an overwhelming number of articles out there about it because it's relatively new. That's the only reason.
Yeah, I
There's
think
going to be a
the
lot more.
interesting point is the studies. It's kind of weird though, is this one had versus just a bunch of articles on stuff. This one had the two studies, the reference. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yep. Yeah. There were fewer references, but they were deeper. You know what I mean? They were much more deep in their assessment of what was going on. So that's really what that comes down to. So the big deal is who can anybody who could be exposed if you're running your agents in your browsers, if you're running any of the agent modules in your browsers, or you're running an agentic browser directly from them, then you're the people that this is really targeting. So you just need to be aware of it. And especially if you're a high value target, if you're in the C level and you're running an agentic browser, you are on. I can promise you're going to be on the radar for people who want to misuse this technology. They're not going to go after the janitor. If they're going to do anything, they're going to spend time to find out who the high value targets are, and they're going to go after them. So you're just going to have a bigger target on your back. You just need to be aware of it. That's really what it is. it's there's this cross tenant. That's another thing. If you're managing cross tenant, you got to be careful about that too, because it can span tenants. Using a context browser like this can span tenants. That's bad.
Very bad. And again, when we say that, it happens lightning fast. Yeah, too bad.
Yeah. So what should you check? Run an inventory on your software. Look for anything
It's
like
really important. Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, you got to
anything
know
like
what's on your
Comet.
machines, know
Yeah,
anything. Yeah, you got to pick up on any
patches.
changes there. It's really important. I mean, what's
Yeah.
installed on people's computers has to be the most important thing. Whether it's applications or extensions or whatever the case, these are the things that can truly tell you, hey, something's going on. Either somebody installed something they shouldn't have knowingly, or they installed something they shouldn't have unknowingly. It doesn't matter. Both will indicate something to you.
Yeah, so the list you should be looking for. Comet is a browser that's got agentic capabilities. Atlas, of course, that's OpenAI. Claude for Chrome, that's a plug-in there. Edge for Copilot, right? There's a plug-in. Chrome for with Gemini in it. Brave, Firefox in AI mode. Again, same sort of thing. These fall all in the same bucket. You just need to be aware. Most people, if you find installs, sometimes those things get installed and you don't even know they've been installed. So you need to just do an inventory of any of those and make sure if you've got them there that you're aware of it and you're using them as safely as you can, and realize that all of this risk we're talking about these breaking the boundaries applies. So that's really there's really been no major event or incident that's occurred because of these things, but it's just a matter of time. I mean, honestly, it's like those npm libraries, Chris. It's just a matter of time before all hell breaks loose on some of these. So that's where that's going to be. All right. So I think that kind of covers it. Just make sure to do that inventory. Make sure your credentials, keep those in a nice isolated place. Don't let your browser store your damn username and passwords,
Yeah, for
especially
sure.
when your browser's
What?
connected to the
And
universe.
and I was on mute because I had dogs barking, but I was going to say, yeah, it's only a matter of time, and it's going to be a matter of time when it happens. What's Bob and I? We're going to say, we told you so.
Yeah, 100%. It's kind of a sucker bet for us. We know it's going to happen. This is what it's just too easy for it to happen in this. So I mean, it's not really that we're not geniuses. We're just saying, hey, look, this is opening up a possibility for a lot of really bad stuff, and statistically, that means it's going to happen. That's where we're at. So, well, there we go.
All
Be
right, I know
careful.
this wasn't the sexiest of topics, but it's a good
Yeah.
one.
Well, it's a warning to anybody monkeying around with these, that doesn't understand them. These agentic browsers and/or these plugins for LLMs into your browsers. You just need to be aware of that. They're not the standard thing that you can harden against, because again, you're basically tying a black box into your browser. So I mean,
They're a very, very shiny object.
yeah, and they're fun and they'll do some cool stuff. They can also do the uncool stuff just in a lot. They can have a lot of ramifications. You just need to be aware. That's the main
Yep.
thing.
All right.
Well, all right.
It's a wrap for us.
Wrap for us. We'll see you next
See
time.
you
It'll
next
be
time.
number 30. We're
30.
gonna do
Wow.
session 30, man. That's crazy.
I wish I was 30.
Me too. Me too. Yeah, I mean, I could do 30. I've done 30 twice. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to have one of those back, no doubt. All right, see everybody. See you next time.